But you seem to have an idea how this works. The book, The Structure of Magic, for me is a very good outline of how to get a good first touch with this work.
A very limited outline. It's a limited outline. It's good. It's a very good launching pad, but it won't get you into orbit. So what you've asked me about my developments and where I've taken things. So maybe about 10 years ago, I was in my living room and I was hosting Alex Vesely. Alex Vesely is Viktor Frankl's grandson. And I was privileged to know Viktor Frankl, and he is one of the platforms that make my therapy work, logotherapy, something that I use every day in my therapy practice. So I was fortunate to meet Viktor Frankl, and then his grandson, Alex, was spending a month with me trying to decide, would he be a filmmaker, which is what he finally decided, or would he be a therapist in the lineage of his grandfather, who's learning about Ericksonian techniques. Eventually, Alex made 2 documentary films, one about his grandfather and one about Milton Erickson. There's a documentary that exists that describes some of Erickson's life. Wizard of the Desert is the name of that documentary. You could Google it. So Alex is in my living room, and we're watching a movie. It's my then wife and me and Alex. And suddenly, Alex deconstructs the movie for me. And he explains the grammar that makes movie work. And I go, bonk. And this is a defining moment in my life. And suddenly I understand a template of how to understand Milton Erickson. That if I understand the grammar of movie or the grammar of any art, I understand perfectly what Milton Erickson did. Now, Alex studied with a Viennese genius, Christian Mukunda. He's a strategic dramatist who's now become a dear friend of mine, and we're collaborating. I'm helping him a little bit on a book that he's writing. His books are available in German, where he is the quintessential deconstructionist. And he creates stories. So if Mercedes wants to build a museum, before they would contact the architect, they'd contact Christian, and he would help them to build a story around which the architect could build a museum, design a museum. He's helping right now to redesign the Viennese airport. And because, unfortunately, my German is poor, I can't read all of Christian's works, but I recommend coaches and other people, and Christian and I have taught some workshops together in Austria about the intersection between strategic dramaturgy and psychotherapy. But Christian helped me to really understand deconstruction. And when you look into the grammar of art and you understand something simple like montage, the power of juxtaposition, you understand Erickson. When you understand the way in which movies are based in misdirection and destabilization, the way in which movies are based in arousal, the way in which seeding is used in movies, the way in which multiple level communication is used, the way in which movies set up, pay off. When you understand the grammar of movies, you see immediately what Erickson was doing. Now, the purpose of art is to transport people and help people to change their state, their mood, their perspective. You don't go to the theater, you don't go to the movies, you don't read poetry, you don't read novels because you want information. You do this because you're seeking a sensation. You want to change your state.
And maybe you can help us to understand that template a little better, because in one of your books you also use Salvador Dali as an example how art has changed. And now you're introducing deconstruction to the work of Milton Erickson. So in one book you deconstructed hypnosis. But what is the model to understand Milton Erickson's work?
Well, if you start very simply, states. Clients come to us because they're in ineffective states. They're not motivated, they're not responsible, they're not connected, they're not curious, they're not creative. So the client comes because they're in a calcified state and they don't feel like they have the ability to modify their state to meet the adaptive demands of the environment. So Erickson was a hypnotist. Hypnosis is about helping people to change their state. Now, once you understand that hypnosis is a model of helping people to change their state, you don't necessarily need to do a formal induction to help people change their state. Now, the people in the world who are experts at changing states are artists. An interior designer is creating a design to help you to change your state. When you go into a church, you feel a change in your state. If you go out into the country, you feel a change in your state. So art is designed to help people to change their mood, their emotion, their perspective, their state. And if we understand the grammar of art, and the grammar of art is actually very similar across arts. The techniques that a novelist uses are not essentially different than the techniques that a choreographer uses in creating a dance. There's very similar techniques. Now, when you read a novel, you have no idea of the linguistic apparatus that's being put into place by the writer, and you don't want to know. You don't want to understand that this person is writing a suspensive sentence and with free modifiers. You don't want to understand that. You don't want to be a part. You want to be involved in the moment and allow your state to be changed. So the techniques that are used by movie makers, I use movies because it's the most complex art form, the most multidimensional art form. It consists of so many arts combined into one.
You're referring to Campbell's hero's journey. So what I understand is the basic template is, no. So what is the template?
There's a grammar. There's an implicit grammar to influencing states. Now, if you study, for example, the language of hypnosis, like from a meta model, and you teach yourself presuppositions. How do you use presuppositions? This is a cognitive process that is done intentionally, and that is a technique. And then I'm applying the technique. Now, Erickson was operating from a state. He was operating not using techniques. He was operating from a state of utilization, for example, or being strategic, for example, or being experiential, for example. These were states that Erickson inhabited. The technique came from the state. Now, because of the way that my mind works, I like deconstructing, and I like understanding how do you use the output channels of communication in order to have a more robust effect on another human being. So temporally, but physically, gesturally, posturally, tonally, in terms of proximity, how do you use the output channels of communication to have an effect? So this is my area of inquiry, and those other models are working in terms of larger molecules, and I'm trying to move down into a subatomic level to understand, the analogy would be not to understand relativity, but to understand things from a quantum perspective. How do things work? Now, if I take Milton Erickson and I compare Milton Erickson to Aaron Beck, founder of cognitive behavior therapy, a great therapist, I can't compare them too well. If I even compare Milton Erickson to Steve Andreas, who's a great practitioner of neurolinguistic program, I can't compare them too well. But if I compare Milton Erickson to Steven Spielberg, I have no problem. Because the methodology that Steven Spielberg uses to create a movie is the same methodology that Milton Erickson used in terms of the structure of the communication and the way that he was using communication to elicit reorientations and changes in mood, in perspective, in emotion, in state. So Milton Erickson is not so incomprehensible as people make him, if you know how to compare Erickson into the phenomenological world of the effectiveness of art. Art is a necessity. It's a way we exercise our emotions. It's a way that we can help people to transform states. You can't say to somebody, laugh, because these are the 4 reasons to laugh. You have to give them an experience, tell them a joke. Now, if you understand the structure of jokes and the way in which a really excellent comedian could understand and deconstruct his own joke frame by frame to make a joke that I couldn't, if I told you, it wouldn't be funny. But when the comedian who knows implicitly, after so many years, the grammar of how to make a simple joke come alive and lead the audience to laugh. So if the person is unmotivated, you can't say, do 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'll be motivated. You need to create an evocative experience.
I like this comparison a lot because I also am very fond of art. But to bring it on the level of like understanding, like I don't try to understand Steven Spielberg's movies. I just enjoy them. In
Absolutely.
Germany, we have this tendency to work more transparently than Milton Erickson did in the 70s. Especially Gunther Schmidt always frames and explains certain steps of his way he's doing his work, of the way he's trying to get to an outcome, and focusing the attention of the coachee to some certain aspects. What do you think about this? Like, how transparent do you like to work, and what do you think about efficiency of like transparent work versus the indirect way which Milton Erickson seemed to prefer?
Well, if you explain a joke, what's the difference between heaven and hell? The difference is that in heaven they tell jokes, in hell they explain them. So if you explain a magic trick, it loses its integrity. So the person who writes a novel doesn't explain the structure of the grammar of how to write a novel and how to use suspensive sentences, the example that I used before, compound sentences. But this is something that has been trained into them. So for some people, for the novice, it may be helpful for them to understand structure. But when you go to the movies, as good as I am at deconstructing, if the movie maker is better at creating an induction so that I don't pay attention to the structural grammatical elements that make movie work. You go to a movie where there's one cut every 7.8 seconds in the average movie, and you never see a cut. You don't want to see the cuts. You don't want to see how the cuts are arranged. You just want to have the experience. So for the people who were with Milton Erickson, just do it. I'll have the experience. For the people who studied Milton Erickson, they wanted to have a cognitive framework to explain all of the things that Erickson was doing, and any one of the cognitive frameworks, NLP, for example, is insufficient. You need to have a number of different cognitive frameworks for understanding the intricacies of Erickson's art, and none of them are sufficient in and of themselves. But taken together, you begin to get a picture of who Erickson was, and then you decide how it is that you can stand on Erickson's shoulders and replicate in your way some of the things that he was capable of doing. I'm not Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson was like that iron fist. He worked assiduously. Like if you want to be the best golfer, you are golfing 24/7. And Milton Erickson wanted to be the world's greatest psychotherapeutic communicator, and he worked at it, and he accomplished it. Now, I don't want to work that hard. I have some hobbies that I enjoy. I don't want to be that determined as Milton Erickson was. I'd like to be the best Jeff Zeig, and I work on it, but not with that singular mindedness. I'm going to be the world's greatest psychotherapeutic communicator. We have to stop, unfortunately. I'm so sorry because, once you wind me up, I don't even give you room as the interviewer to come in because I go off.